Shoe Dog, a memoir by the creator of Nike, by Phil Knight. Picture yourself at 24, clutching a shiny Stanford MBA, yet feeling completely and utterly lost. You're back in your childhood bedroom. Yes, that bedroom, staring at faded track ribbons collecting dust on the wall. There's this gnawing sensation in your gut that life has to be more than a sensible job with a retirement plan. You've got what you call a crazy idea. It's so brilliantly simple that you're baffled nobody else has thought of it. So what do? You sweet-talk your dad into lending you some cash, hop on a plane to Japan, and somehow find yourself face-to-face with a room full of shoe company executives. Your palms are sweating, your heart's doing gymnastics, and then comes the question that changes everything. Mr. Knight, what is the name of your company? Here's the catch. You don't actually have a company. You've been winging it this whole time. In a moment of pure, beautiful panic, your eyes dart around mentally, landing back on those blue ribbons from your track days. You hear yourself say, "Blue Ribbon. I represent Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon." That split-second improvisation, that moment of terrified brilliance, sparked one of the most legendary companies on the planet, Nike. Shoe Dog, the book we're diving into today, throws every boring business manual out the window. There are no revolutionary 7-step frameworks or morning routine hacks here. This is Phil Knight laying it all bare. A deeply personal journey through doubt, beautiful chaos, and failure after glorious failure. It's the tale of how a reserved, somewhat awkward kid from Oregon, armed only with a crazy idea and sheer stubbornness, built an empire that transformed sports culture forever. By the time we're done today, you'll see that building something meaningful has nothing to do with perfect planning. It's about taking that first terrifying step into the unknown. It's about assembling a ragtag team of misfits who believe in your vision as fiercely as you do. And above all, you'll discover the beautifully simple mantra that carried Phil Knight through his darkest hours, advice he gave himself during a foggy morning run all those years ago. Whatever comes, just don't stop. This is what it really takes to chase a dream. Our journey kicks off in 1962 with 24-year-old Phil Knight feeling completely adrift. He'd checked all the boxes: University of Oregon degree, Stanford MBA, a year in the Army. Yet inside, he still felt like a lost kid, painfully shy, uncertain, desperately searching for something more than just a paycheck and a suburban existence. He craved meaning, creativity. He wanted to win. Or more accurately, he simply couldn't stand the thought of losing. While at Stanford, in an entrepreneurship class, he'd written this research paper. The topic? Shoes. As a decent, though admittedly not spectacular, runner on the University of Oregon track team, shoes were his world. He'd also noticed how Japanese cameras were absolutely dominating the market once controlled by German manufacturers. His paper made a bold claim. High-quality, affordable Japanese running shoes could do the exact same thing to the shoe market, which was completely dominated by German powerhouse Adidas. The idea wasn't just homework. It became an all-consuming obsession. He called it his crazy idea. Most people would have collected their A and moved on with life. But Knight couldn't shake it. One foggy Oregon morning, during a run, everything clicked into place. He needed to see the world, sure, but more importantly, he needed to get himself to Japan and find a shoe company to partner with. Gathering every ounce of courage, he pitched the idea to his father. He framed it as a world tour, rounding out his education. The pyramids, the Himalayas, ancient Asian temples. The business angle, the Japan stop, was practically a footnote. He fully expected his father, a stability-loving, play-it-safe kind of man, to shut it down immediately. But here's the twist. His dad said yes. He recognized something in his son, this hunger for adventure he'd buried in himself. He gave his blessing, and, crucially, some cash. Armed with a loan from Dad and about $1,500 from selling his beloved car, Knight and his Stanford buddy Carter took off. First stop, Hawaii. They planned a few weeks. They stayed months, surfing and attempting to sell encyclopedias door to door. It was an absolute disaster. Knight, crippled by shyness, couldn't sell water in a desert. The constant rejection felt crushing. Then he tried selling mutual funds and discovered he was surprisingly talented at it, quickly earning enough to bankroll the rest of his adventure. But the experience taught him something invaluable. He could only sell something he genuinely believed in. While lounging in Hawaii, Carter fell for a girl and decided to stay put. Knight faced a crossroads: head home to safety or continue alone into the unknown. He chose the journey. He flew to Japan, a country still visibly scarred by World War II, a place his grandmother had warned him about, filled with people who were, just a generation earlier, considered the enemy. Walking Tokyo's streets, he felt this unexpected kinship with Japanese culture, its elegant simplicity, its quiet beauty, its resilient spirit. After chatting with two American ex-GIs who published an import magazine, he learned a crucial lesson about Japanese business. Patience is everything. Politeness is currency, and never be the loud, pushy American stereotype. The Japanese communicate in subtle circles. A no is never blunt, and a yes is rarely certain. With this wisdom echoing in his head, he took a train to Kobe, to Onitsuka Tiger headquarters, the shoe company he'd researched back at Stanford. He arrived 30 minutes late and was greeted by 4 stone-faced executives. They toured him through the factory, and he was absolutely mesmerized by the rhythmic sounds of shoemaking. Then came the moment of truth. They sat him at the head of this long conference table, the seat of honor. All 4 executives just stared at him, waiting. He'd rehearsed this scene 1,000 times in his head, but now his mind went completely blank. He thought about everything on the line: disappointing his parents, failing himself, a future of hawking products he couldn't care less about. Then one executive, a Mr. Miyazaki, asked him, "Mr. Knight, what company are you with?" Time froze. He didn't have a company. This was all smoke and mirrors. In a flash of pure panic, his mind raced back to his childhood bedroom, to the one thing he was genuinely proud of, those blue ribbons from his track days. "Blue Ribbon," he heard himself say. "Gentlemen, I represent Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon." The name had a nice ring to it. The executives murmured it back and forth. "Blue Ribbon, Blue Ribbon." He then launched into the pitch he'd memorized from his Stanford paper, talking about the wide-open American shoe market and how Tiger shoes could undercut Adidas. The executives were genuinely impressed. They revealed they'd been eyeing the American market themselves. They showed him 3 shoe models: a training shoe called the Limber Up, a high-jump shoe called the Spring Up, and a discus shoe they'd named the Throw Up. Knight had to literally bite his tongue to stop from laughing. To his complete astonishment, they offered him the chance to represent Tiger shoes in the United States. He said yes before they could reconsider, asking them to ship samples to his parents' address and promising a $50 money order. The meeting was a success. Maybe his crazy idea wasn't so crazy after all. Before heading home, Knight completed his around-the-world odyssey. He witnessed the temples of Hong Kong, the heartbreaking poverty of Manila, and the sacred Ganges River in India. He hiked through the Himalayas, stood awestruck before the Sphinx in Egypt, and felt history's weight in Jerusalem, Rome, and Athens. In Greece, standing before the temple of Athena Nike, the goddess of victory, he felt this powerful, inexplicable recognition, like this was where everything originated. He didn't know it then, but that name, Nike, would one day define his entire existence. He returned home in early 1963, fundamentally changed. But one question burned in his mind. He walked through the door, hugged his family, and the first words tumbling out were to his father. "Dad, did my shoes come?" The shoes hadn't arrived. For agonizing months, nothing. Knight began seriously fearing his $50 had vanished forever. He took an accounting job at Price Waterhouse to pay the bills, putting his dream on the back burner. But he hadn't given up. Finally, in early 1964, a box plastered with Japanese writing showed up. Inside were 12 pairs of Tiger running shoes, creamy white with blue stripes. They were absolutely gorgeous. Knight knew exactly his next move. He sent 2 pairs to his old track coach at the University of Oregon, the legendary Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was more than just a coach. He was a mad scientist of footwear, a relentless tinkerer obsessed with making shoes lighter and better. He'd regularly steal his runners' shoes, tear them completely apart, and stitch them back together with wild modifications. He believed every ounce you could shave off a shoe gave you a competitive edge. Knight figured Bowerman would find the Tigers fascinating. He was more than fascinated. A few days later, Bowerman met Knight for lunch and dropped a bombshell. "How about letting me in on the deal?" he asked. He didn't just want to buy a few pairs. He wanted to be a full partner. Knight was absolutely floored. It was like God himself had asked to join his startup. They shook hands on a 51-49 partnership, with Knight maintaining operational control. Blue Ribbon Sports was now officially and legitimately a real company. With Bowerman's $500 matching his own investment, Knight placed his first substantial order, 300 pairs of Tigers, worth about $1,000. When they arrived, he stored them in his parents' basement, which became Blue Ribbon's unofficial first headquarters. He quit his accounting gig and spent spring 1964 selling shoes straight out of his Plymouth Valiant's trunk at track meets scattered across the Pacific Northwest. The response was overwhelming. He couldn't write orders fast enough. He suddenly understood why this felt completely different from selling encyclopedias. He wasn't selling at all. He was sharing genuine belief. He believed in running. He believed that if people got out and ran a few miles daily, the world would genuinely improve. And he believed these shoes were superior. People sensed his authentic belief, and they wanted to be part of it. Belief, he realized, is absolutely irresistible. The business grew rapidly, but so did the headaches. Knight was perpetually short on cash. His bank, particularly a manager named Bob Wallace, viewed his explosive growth not as success, but as reckless risk. Wallace despised Knight's business model. "You're growing too fast for your equity," he'd warn. Knight would fire back. "Life is growth. You grow or you die." This banking battle would become a central struggle for the next decade. Every time he needed a loan for more inventory, it was warfare. He'd barely scrape by, repay the loan, then immediately double his next order, starting the whole exhausting cycle again. In 1965, Knight hired his first full-time employee, a quirky, intense runner he knew from Stanford, named Jeff Johnson. Johnson was supposed to be a California salesman, but he quickly became so much more. He was obsessive, firing off long, rambling letters to Knight every single day, packed with ideas, customer insights, and desperate pleas for encouragement that Knight, overwhelmed and communication challenged, rarely answered. Johnson pioneered the mail order business, building an intricate customer database on index cards, sending birthday wishes and training tips. He created community. He also, in 1966, opened the first-ever Blue Ribbon retail store in Santa Monica, a place that became a runner's sanctuary. While Johnson built the brand from the ground up, Bowerman was revolutionizing the shoes themselves. He constantly bombarded Onitsuka with new designs, pushing them to create shoes specifically for American runners. He developed the Cortez, featuring revolutionary full-length midsole cushioning, which rapidly became their bestseller. But just as momentum was building, storm clouds gathered. Knight received a letter from an East Coast wrestling coach, a former Marlboro man no less, claiming he was Onitsuka's exclusive American distributor. Knight was poaching his territory. Heart-pounding, Knight flew back to Japan for a confrontation with Onitsuka. It was a nightmare. His main contact, Mr. Miyazaki, was gone. He met with a new representative, then eventually with the founder himself, Mr. Onitsuka. In an incredibly tense meeting, Knight managed to secure distribution rights for the 13 western states, but the relationship was clearly fracturing. The Marlboro man would handle the East Coast. A year later, Johnson discovered the Marlboro man was selling running shoes on the West Coast, blatantly violating their agreement. Knight had to fly to Japan again, this time flat-out lying, claiming Blue Ribbon had an East Coast office to prove they could manage national distribution. Miraculously, Onitsuka handed him a 3-year contract for the entire United States. The only tiny problem? He didn't actually have an East Coast office. He had to send Johnson. Johnson, a devoted Californian, was absolutely furious. But he was also fiercely, unshakably loyal. He agreed to relocate, moving to Wellesley, Massachusetts, setting up an office in a small house behind a funeral parlor, which doubled as his home. The relationship with Onitsuka, however, kept deteriorating. Shipments arrived late constantly. Orders were routinely wrong. Quality was wildly inconsistent. The best-selling Cortez was frequently missing from shipments, while they'd be drowning in shoes nobody wanted. Knight began suspecting Onitsuka prioritized Japanese customers, sending Blue Ribbon the scraps. He hired a spy inside Onitsuka, a man named Fujimoto, who confirmed his worst fears. The tension exploded in 1971. A new export manager, a slick, ambitious character named Katami, visited Portland. The visit was an unmitigated disaster. Katami was condescending and hypercritical. When Katami briefly left his briefcase unattended in Knight's office, Knight did something he never imagined he'd do. He stole a folder from it. Inside, his absolute worst nightmare lay confirmed: a list of 18 other American shoe distributors and a detailed appointment schedule. Katami was actively planning to replace him. The visit ended with Katami's ultimatum: sell Blue Ribbon to Onitsuka, or they'd find another partner. Knight was trapped. He knew the partnership was dying, but he desperately needed Onitsuka to keep shipping shoes while he figured out his escape plan. He knew he had to create his own brand. First step: finding alternative factories. He flew to Mexico and signed a deal with a factory producing soccer shoes, which he'd repurpose for football. But his new shoe needed a logo. He remembered a young Portland State art student named Carolyn Davidson. He asked her to design a stripe. She returned with several sketches. One of them, this simple, fluid checkmark, jumped out. It resembled a wing. It looked like a whoosh of air. It felt fresh, yet somehow timeless. For her work, they paid her $35. They called it the swoosh. Next challenge: the brand needed a name. Knight absolutely loved Dimension 6. Everyone else absolutely hated it. They debated endlessly. Animal names like Bengal and Condor floated around. With a crushing deadline to get the name on shoeboxes, Knight was out of ideas. Then one morning, Johnson called. A name had appeared to him in a dream: Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Knight wasn't convinced. Nike, Falcon, or Dimension 6, he told his team. We're out of time. He hated all of them, but he hated Nike the least. I guess it'll have to do, he grumbled. He sent a telex to the factory. The brand would be called Nike. In 1972, at the National Sporting Goods Association show in Chicago, they unveiled their new line. The first Nike shoes were frankly a mess. Logos were crooked, quality was questionable. Salesmen openly laughed at the name. What's a Nike? What the hell's a swoosh? But then, something surprising unfolded. People started placing orders. Not because the shoes were exceptional, but because they trusted Blue Ribbon. They trusted Knight and Johnson and their small, passionate team. As one buyer told Johnson, "We've been doing business with you Blue Ribbon guys for years. We know you'll take care of us." Launching Nike was the final straw for Onitsuka. Katami flew to Oregon and officially terminated their contract. He then demanded $17,000 for shoes he claimed were delivered but unpaid. Blue Ribbon countersued for breach of contract and damages. The war had officially begun. Knight gathered his 30 employees. "This is our moment," he declared. "Our liberation, our Independence Day. We're going to war, people. But we know this terrain, and this is a war we can win." The legal battle that followed was brutal, dragging on for years. Knight was deposed for days straight, every decision scrutinized and questioned. But his team rallied hard. Johnson's meticulous records proved absolutely invaluable. Bowerman, though not at his sharpest on the witness stand, lent his formidable reputation to their cause. In a stunning victory, the judge ruled in their favor, finding Onitsuka had breached contract and misappropriated their trademarks. They were awarded $400,000 in settlement. Blue Ribbon had survived. But survival ushered in a whole new set of nightmares. Freed from Onitsuka, Nike absolutely exploded. Sales were doubling annually, rocketing from $1.3 million in 1971 to $140 million by 1979. But they were still perpetually teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Every dollar earned was immediately plowed back into more inventory. They were still living on the float, desperately shuffling money between bank accounts to cover massive payments to their new financing partner, a Japanese trading company called Nisho. In 1975, this precarious financial juggling act came crashing spectacularly down. A series of delayed payments and accounting mistakes led to paychecks bouncing at their Exeter, New Hampshire factory. Their bank, the Bank of California, discovered their creative banking and froze their account, kicked them out completely, and worse, notified the FBI of potential fraud. Nike was on life support. It was Ito, a stern, inscrutable manager at Nisho, a man everyone called the Iceman, who rescued them. He saw Nike's potential. He saw their passion. He walked straight into the Bank of California, paid off their entire debt with a Nisho check, and told the bankers they'd regret their short-sightedness. Nisho became their bank, their partner, and their lifeline. The final, most devastating battle was still ahead. In 1977, a letter arrived from U.S. Customs. It was a bill for $25 million. Their American competitors, companies like Converse and Keds, had lobbied Washington to enforce an obscure protectionist law called the American Selling Price. It was a calculated move designed to completely cripple them, to obliterate them permanently. The fight against the U.S. government dragged on for years. It was a soul-crushing war of attrition that drove Knight into deep depression, and one of his key lawyers, a brilliant but volatile man named Werschkel, into a complete mental breakdown. Knight knew they had to do something outrageous. He decided to sue the U.S. government for $25 million, accusing their competitors of conspiracy to destroy them. The audacious move worked. The government, exhausted by the fight, came to the negotiating table. In 1980, they settled. Nike would pay $9 million. It was a massive sum, but it was victory. They'd survived yet again. With legal battles finally behind them, and sales continuing to skyrocket, there was only one path forward. Despite his deep reservations about losing control and transforming the company's rebellious culture, Knight knew it was time. On December 2, 1980, Nike went public. After tense, last-minute negotiations, they settled on $22 per share. The shy, awkward Oregon kid who'd started with a crazy idea and a $50 loan from his father was now, on paper, worth $178 million. That night, sitting in his recliner, he didn't feel joy or relief. He felt this strange sense of regret, not because of what he'd accomplished, but because he wished, with his whole heart, that he could do it all over again. When you finish Shoe Dog, you realize it's not really about business at all. It's about answering a calling. It's the story of what happens when you pour your entire soul into something, when your work becomes so deeply intertwined with your identity that separating them becomes impossible. The slick, multi-billion-dollar corporation we see today, with its polished advertising campaigns and superstar athletes, was born from absolute chaos. It was forged in moments of sheer panic, gut-wrenching desperation, and crushing uncertainty. One of the most powerful lessons here is the concept of the crazy idea. We all have them. That tiny spark of a thought that seems too ambitious, too weird, or too ridiculously simple to ever work. Phil Knight teaches us, these ideas aren't meant to be dismissed. They're meant to be obsessed over. His passion wasn't some fleeting hobby. It was the fuel propelling him through years of crushing debt, brutal betrayal, and paralyzing self-doubt. He reminds us that belief is genuinely irresistible. When you truly believe in what you're doing, you're not selling a product, you're sharing a piece of your soul. And that's a powerful magnetic force. Another beautiful theme is the transformative power of a team. Knight wasn't some charismatic, larger-than-life visionary leader. He was an introvert, a numbers guy who despised conflict. But he possessed this incredible talent for surrounding himself with people completely different from him. His team, the Buttfaces, as they affectionately called themselves, was this collection of glorious misfits. A paralyzed former track star, overweight accountants, a chain-smoking lawyer, and an obsessive, letter-writing recluse. They argued constantly, they mercilessly insulted each other, but they were bound by unbreakable loyalty and shared belief in the mission. This story powerfully reminds us you don't have to do it alone. Actually, you can't. The journey is too brutal. Find your people, the ones who challenge you, support you, and believe in your crazy idea, even when you start doubting it yourself. But perhaps the most profound lesson, the one beating like a heart throughout the entire book, is this simple mantra: just keep going. Knight's journey wasn't some triumphant march from victory to victory. It was a story of pure survival. It was about getting knocked down repeatedly and somehow finding the strength to stand back up. He wasn't trying to build an empire. For most of the journey, he was just desperately trying not to go bankrupt. He was simply trying not to lose. This distinction is absolutely crucial. Sometimes, the greatest victory is just staying in the game long enough for your luck to shift. It's about enduring the struggle, because the struggle itself makes the journey worthwhile. As Knight himself finally realized, the goal isn't some finish line. The joy lives in the running itself. So what can you take from this today? First, pay attention to your crazy idea. Don't be afraid to pursue it, even if it feels completely illogical. Second, find your tribe. Look for people who share your passion, not just your skill set. And finally, when you face your own battles, and you absolutely will, remember that simple advice Knight gave himself all those years ago. Let everyone else call your idea crazy. Just keep going. Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping until you get there, and don't overthink where there even is. Whatever comes, just don't stop. That was our journey through Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. We've explored Nike's incredible origin story today, but here's the truth. This is just the map. The real treasure lives in the book itself. The magic happens in those quiet moments when a particular story or simple phrase connects with you in ways you didn't expect. This summary is designed to give you a taste of the journey, to help you decide if this is a path worth walking yourself. If you felt even a spark of recognition in Phil's story, if his struggles and triumphs resonated with something inside you, I genuinely urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning about business. It's an experience that can genuinely transform how you see your own path and your own crazy ideas. The link to the book is waiting in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and if you believe in the power of transformative stories, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next adventure into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.